All right, let's jump right into it. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei recently warned that the labor transition driven by artificial intelligence is going to be unusually painful. And honestly, if we just look around, we're already seeing the warning signs flash. Take Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Block. He recently laid off half of his 10,000-person workforce. And he stated it pretty bluntly. Within the next year, the majority of companies will reach the same conclusion. AI has made many of these roles unnecessary. It's a really stark justification and a massive reality check about exactly where the market is heading.
But looking closely at this shift brings us face to face with a massive economy-wide contradiction. It's really the core mystery of our explainer today. Think about it. If firing workers, like you or me, destroys the wage income that creates the very customer base businesses rely on, why are rational, forward-looking companies racing toward this demand cliff? If they can clearly see the cliff ahead, why are they hitting the gas?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking an absolutely fascinating macroeconomic paper by researchers Hemingway, Falk, and Tukalas that models this exact paradox. They call it the AI layoff trap, and it's a captivating game theory mystery that affects literally everyone, from the entry-level worker right up to the CEO.
Section 1. The AI layoff track. The sheer scale and speed of this shift, it's staggering. We're talking about over 100,000 tech workers laid off in 2025 alone. As we just mentioned, Block cut half its workforce. Salesforce replaced 4,000 support agents with agentic AI. And then you have tools like Cognition's Devin, which are enabling one single senior engineer to do the work of an entire 5-person team. This automation displacement isn't some far-off future hypothetical. It is happening right now at scale, and it's heavily impacting entry-level and middle management roles.
And his automation doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It ripples through the broader economy, creating what researchers call a demand cliff. It's a pretty straightforward loop. Step 1, firms replace human workers with AI. Step 2, those displaced workers lose their wage income. Step 3, because workers spend a large fraction of what they earn, this lost income immediately erodes aggregate consumer purchasing power, which leads directly to Step 4, all firms suffer reduced revenue. It's a vicious cycle where fewer employed workers literally means fewer paying customers for everyone.
Section 2, the automation arms race.
Now, here's where the invisible mathematical trap kicks in. When a firm replaces a worker with AI, they capture 100% of the private cost savings. They keep all that money to themselves. But the public demand destruction, that lost workers' purchasing power, doesn't just hit the firm that fired them. Under competitive pricing, that loss gets spread equally across all competitors in the market. So each individual firm only feels a tiny fraction of the overall demand loss it actually causes.
Because of this demand externality, the more fragmented and competitive a market is, the worse the problem gets. As the number of competing firms increases, the over-automation wedge expands significantly. A massive monopoly might realize it's destroying its own customer base and decide to hit the brakes. But in a highly competitive market, each firm's dominant strategy is to automate as fast as possible. Because if they don't, their rivals absolutely will. And they'll suffer the demand lost anyway, just without getting any of the cost savings. They're forced to keep cutting.
Section 3, a lose-lose scenario.
So it's really easy to assume that automation is just a simple transfer of wealth from workers to firm owners, right? But the research proves that is completely false. Over-automation is actually a deadweight loss. Both workers and firm owners end up worse off. Workers obviously lose their wages through displacement, but firm owners lose too, because the collective destruction of consumer demand lowers every firm's revenue far below what they would have made if they had all just cooperated and restrained their automation.
The visual proof of this lose-lose dynamic is pretty striking. If you look at aggregate profits, there's a peak, the highest possible profit level if everyone cooperated. But the actual Nash equilibrium, which is where competitive firms inevitably end up, slides significantly downward and to the right of that peak. At that equilibrium point, both owner surplus and worker income are lower than if they had just coordinated. And the scary part? No redistribution of wealth can fix this because the total pie itself has shrunk.
Now you might be thinking, well, hold on, what if the AI just gets way better and more productive? Won't that fix the economy? Surprisingly, no. The paper shows that this actually triggers the Red Queen effect. Higher AI productivity actually widens the over-automation wedge. Firms chase these market share gains by adopting better AI, but because all their competitors are doing the exact same thing, those gains just cancel each other out. It's like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. They have to sprint just to stay in the exact same place, all while accelerating the destruction of aggregate demand.
Better AI literally amplifies the trap.
Section 4. Why popular fixes fail.
So when we run the numbers on popular policy fixes, the results are actually kind of surprising. Universal basic income? It totally fails to fix the externality. Capital income taxation? Fails. Cohesion bargaining, which is voluntary agreements between firms? Fails too. Upskilling and retraining? Well, that partially helps by recovering some displaced wage income, but it still doesn't close the mathematical gap. It's fascinating, because these are absolutely the most heavily debated solutions in the public sphere right now, yet mathematically, none of them solve the root problem.
The reason these widely debated solutions fail really just comes down to the math. Let's take UBI as an example. UBI absolutely raises the floor on living standards. It gives people a baseline of money to survive, which is great. But it leaves the competitive automation incentive totally unchanged for businesses. Instruments like UBI or capital taxes operate on overall profit levels, but they fail to alter the per-task margin. The destructive game theory happens right at the level of, should I replace this one specific worker with a bot? And UBI doesn't change the math on that specific decision for the firm at all.
Section 5. The only working solution.
This brings us to the only mathematical fix identified in the research. It's called a Pigouvian automation tax. Basically, this is a per-unit charge set exactly equal to the uninternalized marginal external cost of the demand loss. Now, in plain English, it forces every single firm to financially internalize the exact amount of aggregate demand destruction they're imposing on their rivals when they fire a human for a bot.
Let's break down how this actually works in practice. First, it perfectly aligns private incentives with social costs by charging the firm for the exact demand loss they put on their rivals. Now, obviously, it does require observable firm-level automation rates to implement, so we need really good data. But here is the absolute best part. The revenue generated from this tax can directly fund those retraining programs. By recycling the tax revenue into building durable human capital, displaced workers eventually get better jobs, consumer demand recovers, and the required tax actually becomes self-limiting over time. It's a temporary necessity to bridge the gap and rebuild our consumer base.
And honestly, that is what you should really take away from this explainer today. We aren't just passengers on an unstoppable technological train. The math shows us exactly what the trap is and exactly how to dismantle it. The competitive nature of business makes this a runaway arms race, for sure. But smart policy can alter the track. It leaves us with one final urgent question to think about. Can we rewrite the rules of the game before we automate our way to zero demand? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.